Hi, I'm Mallory, and today we're going to be doing an ombre procedure from beginning to end. Okay, so here's my tray. This is what it looks like before I do the procedure. Got my machine, some cotton rounds, 3 little pigment rings, one with secondary numbing, one with water and green soap, and this will have the pigment in it. Some Q-tips, micro Q-tips, and some wet wipes. And here is a dry Kleenex and a wooden Q-tip to take off the numbing cream. And then I use a yoga block and I wrap it because it helps me position my arm without hurting my neck. I've actually never seen that done, but it really helps me. Okay, you'll want a pee pad sitting right here under your client. You're just preventing any of their liquids and your liquids from getting onto your table. We've got just the massage table here and these lights. You want really good lighting for this work and a really good chair to sit in, a really good comfortable chair to sit in. So I've swatched some ash brown on her forehead. I'm trying to match her brow hair color in here and her natural hair color, and it's a pretty ashy brown, so there's a color called ash brown. We talk about it more in the color section, but I'll go in depth about why I chose ash brown. So now we're going to remove our numbing cream off of one side. You're just going to take a micro applicator and glide it along the brow like this to get the excess off. And then you're gonna take a Kleenex and lightly press it into the brow so that you get all of that excess numbing cream off. The reason we're lightly doing this is because we do not want to get rid of our outline. And this is why I use those surgical marks, because if I want to reinforce my outline, I always keep some mapping string. So you want to make sure you see those lines very clearly. We're gonna start with the tail. And the tail is usually the part of the brow that has the thinnest skin. So we want to be gentlest with our pressure on this part of the brow. So I'm just going to start kind of making a whipping motion in the air so that when I touch the skin, I'm already making that motion. Can you feel that, or do you feel numb?
I feel it, but it doesn't hurt.
Okay, good. So I'm just gonna whip one direction toward me at the very tip of the tail because that's the way I have the most control. Small whips toward me. And if you see, I have 3 fingers down, I'm doing a 3-point stretch. Okay, now I'm going to move upwards and I'm using my reciprocal movements and staying in the skin. Those reciprocal movements are just short movements back and forth. And this line at the bottom is going to be your darkest line. And the reciprocal movements will create a darker line. You don't want it to be too dark, but you want to make sure it's there and visible. So we're going to do something that we're going to do all throughout the outline, and that's check to see if pigment was deposited. So you take a precise Q-tip with some water on it, and then you pull down and see if you can see any pigment. And right there, I can see a faint line of pigment. You see that line right there? So that means we know our pressure is good, we know our movements are good, and we can keep going. My machine speed is at about 4.5 volts, and I'm really not penetrating the skin that my pressure is so light because I want this line to be pretty light, my outline to be I just want it to be a guide. I'm going really slow. So if my machine speed is slow, that means my hand speed has to be slow. So I'm getting the baseline and I'm trying not to ruin the top outline. So my 3-point stretch is above that top outline and with my pinky below it. I'm not seeing as clear of a line. I just did another swatch to see how much pigment deposited, and this is a pretty meaty part of the brow, so I'm gonna have to go a little deeper here. This is why you keep checking, because you do not want to lose this outline. It's a 0.35 1RL. The reason I'm using that is because this client has extremely healthy skin, and if you can master using a 1RL on a whole brow, you can start to use bigger needle configurations. Okay, so our pressure's good. I can see that line clearly. I'm kind of pulling her brow up so that when I use my pinky as a stretching point, I'm not like poking in her eye. Now, as I approach my first point, my point 1, I'm going to start to whip shade toward me because I don't want that line to be as bold. So I'm just going to lightly whip shade. Just one direction. Okay, so right here, you can do just a pendulum motion also, and it's okay if you go over slightly. Go over that dot slightly, because that means your needle will be in the air because it's a pendulum. But if you want to check to see if you have pigment down at that spot, just take a look. I see a little bit, but I do want to make it more visible. So let me just do some reciprocal movements on the faint line that I see. And now, as I approach that dot, I'm going to start pendulum swinging to make it lighter, coming in and out of the skin. As you can see, it's lighter right here than throughout here. You know, here you see a bolder line, which is where I was doing reciprocal movements. But once I approach the very tip of where we want to see the tattoo, I don't want it to be as bold. So that's where, right here, I started doing some pendulum swings just to get a light and airy line. So we're going to come back now and do the top line, and for the slope I'm going to use some whip shading toward me, and I'm going to keep this bevel or this cartridge with the hole facing up. What that means is that the bevel is shorter where this hole is, it's shorter where the needle is, so the needle has more freedom to move, and that can give you a light and airy deposit of ink. So starting at the tail, I'm just going to whip toward me. I'm pulling up her skin, and my pinky is kind of on her brow bone. And I'm whipping toward me. A whip motion is a faster motion. A reciprocal motion is very slow and short, so you have to have your machine speed slower. When you're whipping, you're just going faster. You can even have your needle with a whipping motion not so much at a 90-degree angle. It can be at kind of 45, and that ensures that the needle's not hitting the skin too hard when you first go in. So you see how the bottom line is more solid and the top line is more airy? That's what you want. You want a darker solid line at the bottom because it's going to be darker down there, and a light airy top line because it's going to be lighter up there. You want to kind of hear that scratching sound. So that means it's kind of pulling at the skin fibers and really implanting that pigment. Let's just keep whipping toward us, toward yourself, all along this line. Okay, let me reinforce this a little bit. And this is kind of bordering on a paintbrush technique where you're kind of like gliding the needle along the skin. It's not a real whip. It's like a glide. And that needle gets to move a little bit with that bevel, so it's making it light and airy. Just keep doing that motion because it's working really well with her skin. You might even find that different motions work well with certain skin types. So right now, I'm not staying at a 90-degree angle. I'm kind of at a 45. You might hear in permanent makeup that you always have to be at a 90, and it's just not the case with tattooing. This would be a 90, this is a 45. Okay, so we know that she wants it to stop right there. We made that mark. So what I'm gonna do here is that same motion, I'm gonna stay at 45 degrees, because if I stay at 90, it's gonna implant too much right there and then lift up. So I'm gonna kind of stay at 45 and drag that needle. You could still pendulum like this because it'll only deposit a slight amount on the other side. It won't be too harsh. Let's just see where that stops. Okay, so I don't really see much pigment there, which means I need to go over it a couple more times, but I do see some here. Again, it's almost like a paintbrush. You're just kind of like doing some light strokes toward you. And you might just take a long time right here, and that's okay because it's a delicate part and it's the front part, it's the first part that's gonna catch their eye. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I wiped away all the pigment, and what I want to see here is a semi-solid line at the bottom, and then a more light and airy line at the top. So we're going to reinforce that tail. Sometimes you have to kind of push hair out of the way. I'm going to do some whipping motions toward me for the bottom line. And then the same for the top line, and don't be afraid to make just a little X where they meet. The X won't heal as an X as long as you've got light pressure. It'll just heal as a point. Now I'm going to start filling in that tail, and that'll help us get more of a point. So we're just going to do movements filling in that body of the tail. Some whip movements toward us. So my speed it's about 5 volts because my hand movements are naturally kind of medium speed, so I work with medium speed, maybe medium to slow. But you want to always be working slow on the tail because it's such a precise spot. Your speed must match your hand movement. Don't use a speed that somebody else uses. We have a video on how to match your hand speed to your machine speed. So I'm going to start overlapping that first section I did by 50%, and I'm whipping in both directions right now. You can just whip toward you if that's easier. Practice on fake skins, whipping in both directions, doing that pendulum. But you're overlapping your first section by 50%. So I'm only going to use that movement in the tail, those whipping and pendulums, and then I'm going to start zigzagging. I'm now going to stop whipping and pendulum swinging. I'm going to start zigzagging my movements. The zigzag movement we used in our practice in our drawing and our skins, you'll now see me put into practice. I'm going to turn my machine speed down because this is a very slow movement. And we're going to be zigzagging, staying in the skin, just going back and forth. So I do one section. Okay, so your first pass, it's not going to be perfect, but we're just trying to get pigment down. So I'm going to go from my bottom line to my top line in a zigzag motion, up and down. Now I'm going to move over and do that overlapping by 50%. Up, down, up, down. Do that again. Overlap by 50%. Up, down, down. Again, overlap, 50%. Up, down, up, down. No pigment there, and then some little freckling of pigment there, so we're going to overlap that by 50%, starting at the baseline, zigzag up, zigzag down, up, down. I'm going to do this all the way to the bulb. Overlap by 50, putting some numbing cream on for my second pass. This is secondary numbing cream. And as you can see, the color is more visible now that it's kind of settled in. And you can kind of see that halo from that numbing cream. So we did the other side, and this is us coming back for our second pass on our first side. It looks like this tail is saturated enough for now, so I'm just gonna go in starting with my zigzags and show you how to do the zigzags for the second pass. We don't want the second pass coming all the way up to the top because we want the top to stay light and airy, but we want the bottom darker. So we're gonna start at the baseline, and this is gonna be a little different. We're not gonna go back and forth. We're just gonna kind of zigzag up and kind of fade out. So I'm gonna zigzag up about 3/4 and then fade out. This is my spot, so I'm going to overlap that by 50% again. Start at the baseline, zigzag and fade out. By fade out, I just mean I'm lifting the needle so that there's not a harsh line there. I'm zigzagging, lifting the needle about 3/4 of the way. So in our practices, we kind of went back and forth a lot with our zigzags, but for your second pass, we're just starting at the baseline and fading upwards. So we're picking up our needle, we're starting at the baseline, picking up our needle and coming back to the baseline. Then overlapping by 50%. Okay, so for the bulb, we know that's kind of where we're stopping and that's where we're stopping. So again, we're going to use that kind of paintbrush technique Make some light, airy movements toward us, toward yourself. Okay, so we just did those paintbrush strokes this way, and now we're gonna kind of angle it this way to do some cross hatching to get a little bit more pigment in there. See, she didn't want it boxy, so we kind of angled it this way. Okay, so for my third pass, I'm really just trying to focus on any places that seem less saturated. So I can tell through here there's a little bit. I'm just gonna zigzag a little bit here. A little through here. But then I am gonna do another section starting at the baseline, but this is gonna be like a cross hatch zigzag. And you'll see it in our eyebrow exercise on synthetic skin too. So we were zigzagging upward, but now we're just gonna come across this whole baseline, just coming up about halfway, because first we went all the way, then we went 3/4 of the way. Now we're gonna come about halfway with a zigzag, starting kind of where the tail is starting, and just zigzagging through here. This can kind of get rid of any lines that were made with your zigzags and just blend everything out and create more saturation in the bottom. So we're doing some zigzags right in here. We're going up and down. I'm just going to touch up some spots I see that need more pigment. And okay, so at the end I take some clean cotton rounds and some green soap and water, and I'm gonna clean these off real good. And that purple surgical marker can stay sometimes, but it'll wear off in a couple of days. Just make sure you tell your client that. So this is, they're gonna be fading like 30 to 40% from this. This is the darkest they'll be. Tomorrow they'll be dark too, but then they'll start kind of scabbing and flaking off. And they're a little red, that's gonna neutralize too.